Tuna Canyon Road has a loophole. So in California, if there's no posted sign, then there's like default settings depending on the type of road. Well, there is no specification that I could find in the California Vehicle Code for one-way rural roads, which is what I would call this. So that means that the only speed limit that applies is reasonable and prudent. This car is designed to go fast, safely, if you're a competent driver. So today we're going to be driving at reasonable and prudent speeds for a Porsche GT4 and talking a little bit about the statistics on speed enforcement and how it actually doesn't really do much. So well, maybe we just enjoy the road for a second before we get into statistics. Yes. Yes. Okay. So one of the things that makes this road different from PCH, what makes this road safer, is that for drivers, it feels less safe. And the reason for that is, like, look here, we have no barriers. It's a massive, like, chasm that you will probably, I don't know, die if you fall into. And this is not even the deepest part of this valley. So you have a lot of things that inspire fear in the motorist, and furthermore, you don't have people crossing the road. You don't have intersections. It's basically like a controlled access highway, except for it's a one-lane rural road. So that makes this road, ironically, safer than PCH. And when we look at the statistics, I was combing through a lot of the data, and what I found was that there was no real significant correlation between maximum rural or urban highway speed limit in a state, in the United States, and the death rate per billion vehicle miles traveled within that state. So what that means is states that have higher speed limits don't have a higher rate of death on those roads. What actually is correlated, ironically, or not ironically, it's actually very expected, is IQ and teen pregnancy rates, both of which have a significantly higher coefficient of correlation with vehicle fatality per billion mile traveled. And I think that's pretty obvious as to why that is. Like, if you are unable to predict the consequences of your actions, it's going to be very likely that you're going to end up down in a gorge because you're not going to be able to predict that there might be a rock slide here, for example. And so, but it's not just the way that you drive, it's also the way that the civilization around you is built. And different states in the United States are basically, they might as well be different countries when it comes to road laws. Oh God, it's so pretty up here. But yeah, when you have a state that has not very smart people in it, you're going to have poor road planning. And California is a perfect example of that. As much as I love this state, the road planning here is clearly done by idiots, especially in Los Angeles. It's really bad in San Diego too. So if you're in a society surrounded by very stupid people, even if you're a safe driver, it doesn't matter. The fatality rate per billion vehicle miles traveled is going to be higher. And you might say, oh, well, what about enforcement? Maybe different states, maybe it doesn't matter so much what the speed limit is. God, I love this car. Maybe it matters how that speed limit is enforced. So how many police officers there are there speed cameras? And I was looking through that data as well. The coefficient of correlation, which tells you how much one variable in a statistical model depends on another. The coefficient of correlation is well below 0.1. It's no real correlation. So how many cops you have how low you set the speed limit. It doesn't matter. What matters is city planning, road planning, and having the foresight to basically foresee long-term consequences of your actions. And that's why teen pregnancy rate has such a higher correlation with vehicle fatalities per billion mile traveled. Let's just take a break here and talk a little bit more about statistics, and then that way I can hit this road with full focus. But basically, if you're unable to foresee long-term consequences of immediate actions, how are you going to be able to predict that somebody in front of you might do something unpredictable, right? How are you going to be able to plan for the eventuality when you're on a road like this and there's been a rock slide? You're going to modulate your speed based on the car that you're driving, based on the road conditions, and based on the dangers that you can foresee. So if you can foresee less danger, you're not going to be a very safe driver. It doesn't matter how much you enforce the speed limit. It doesn't matter how low you set it. And you might be saying, oh, well, you've just looked at instantaneous data. So maybe states that are more dangerous, they lowered those speed limits as a response to having more dangerous roads. And that's a pretty fair point. But when we look at the history of speed limits in the United States, we had no federal limit prior to 1974. And there were two states, Montana and Nevada. And those states didn't have maximum speed limits. So they basically had United States autobahns. Much like this road that we're on here, the only speed limit that applied was reasonable and prudent. So basically, you as a driver have to have the foresight to understand the consequences of your actions. And we would expect that this sudden lowering of speed limits across the country, we would expect that to be reflected as a decrease in deaths per billion vehicle miles traveled. But what we actually see is that deaths per billion vehicle miles overshoots a predictive curve by, on average, I think it was about 4% per year until that federal speed limit ended.
Alright, so what do I mean by predictive curve? Well, it'd be unfair to compare fatality rates between years without accounting for the fact that these rates generally decrease as safety technology improves. Therefore, we need to apply a curve of best fit, which accounts for the progression of safety technology and from which we can make comparisons regarding the impact of the speed limit change in 1974. But what shape is that curve? As safety improves, it becomes proportionally more difficult to develop better safety technologies, because the low-hanging fruit of ideas have been exhausted. For example, it is easier to come up with the idea for a headrest to prevent whiplash than it is to design an ABS system that improves braking performance. Owing to this proportionality between rate of safety improvement and the instantaneous value of safety, we expect that an exponential line of best fit will show a good coefficient of correlation with our data. And it does, with a value of about 0.96 for years prior to 1974. When we overlay the post-1974 data, we see that it generally agrees well with our predictive model, indicating satisfactory performance. And since the period during which the 55 mph federal limit was enforced does not show outsized improvements in safety when compared to our model, any improvements in safety during those years can likely be attributed to other factors such as technology.
And these speed limits weren't in place for safety. They were put in place because of the oil crisis. So in 1974, we had the Yom Kippur War, and that led to an OPEC embargo on the United States. So all these oil-producing countries don't want to sell to us anymore, and we actually instituted this 55 mph limit as a way of fuel rationing, not to improve road safety. This act wasn't repealed until 1995. So we would expect that roads would suddenly become much more dangerous after 1995. But the thing is, we don't actually see a rise in fatalities per billion vehicle miles until about 2011. And the reason for that is that in 2011, the Flynn effect reversed. So Flynn effect is this theory that IQ increases over the years. And that's been true throughout the Industrial Revolution, because there were economic circumstances that basically drove people to follow more intellectual pursuits to be able to survive within an industrializing society. But in 2011, we see IQ start to drop, specifically in the United States. Right at 2011, that's when IQ start dropping. And we can come up with theories about why that is. It could be that technology has progressed to a point that people don't have to think as much as they used to during the Industrial Revolution, so now we're in a post-industrial society. And I think it's also because of environmental toxins. People have on average like 7 grams of plastic in their brain, which is pretty insane. So it's really interesting to me that the first time in the history of the automobile that we see over a 1-decade period an increase in vehicle fatalities per billion miles traveled is also when IQs start dropping. And it's also data that's correlated across the United States with decreased road fatalities. When you have a higher IQ in your state, you're less likely to have road fatalities. So all of this is basically to say that it's not about speed limits or speed enforcement. It's about how you actually design a society to live in, how you design your roads, how you think about driving as a culture. And we're just doing a piss poor job of that here. And first gear is brutal. Okay, so we're down here at beautiful PCH. I would call it a nice road for driving just because it has curves and views, but the reality is that this road has always been a death trap. Does this look like a highway to you? As you can see, people are driving like it is a highway. People are not doing 25 because why would you stare at your speedometer while you're driving? That's just stupid. That's not safe. You should be looking where you're going, if anything. But you have people parked on the side of the road. You have intersections. And yet you have this wide 4-lane space that makes drivers feel incredibly safe to speed. And when I say speed, I don't mean relative to the speed limit. I mean relative to reasonable and prudent. So when you have an intersection, you need to be prepared to stop when that light turns red. And this road, the way that it's set up with the gradual curves, it's encouraging people to drive at 100 miles per hour here. So you can put as many signs as you want and as many cops as you want. People drive intuitively based on what feels safe. The fact is that this road is just designed very poorly. They need to decide whether this is a highway or a street. Is this a local street that has intersections and businesses, and there's a university up there where literally the campus extends to the highway? Like, where in Germany would you ever see on an Autobahn a university on the side of the Autobahn? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? So either they need to make this into a controlled access road where you only have traffic moving in one direction, and then you can have a speed limit be infinity, which Germany has shown with the fact that their highways are statistically safer than ours. Despite their lack of speed limit, their highways are safer than ours. Like, you can clearly tell these people are not looking at the sign. And it doesn't matter that the police have been out here handing out speeding tickets like candy on Halloween. It is just road design. That's everything. I mean, look at this truck. Way over the speed limit. Because speed limits and enforcement doesn't matter. This is the most heavily policed road probably in America. I personally believe there shouldn't be speed limits. We should just design better roads. So if this is a street, people are going to respect that and they're going to drive slower naturally. If this is a highway, people are going to treat it like a highway. Highway is literally in the name. Pacific Coast Highway. It's not Pacific Coast Street, right? But there's intersections. What is this? It is genuinely insane. And I've also seen some pretty crazy behavior from the police down here. Like the same cop who will pull somebody over and give them a ticket for doing more than 25. Okay, here we go. We have a cop right here in our mirror. So he's speeding. The police officer is literally speeding right now. Look, I'm gonna set my cruise control to exactly 25, and he's still gonna be taking off for me. So the same officer who's gonna pull you over and give you a ticket for going over 25 himself will speed. And this is not the most egregious example that I've seen down here. I've seen officers take off at literally 50 miles per hour. Police themselves are very dangerous drivers in a lot of cases. I shouldn't be sitting here thinking like, what speed is going to get me a ticket? I should be thinking like, what is actually a safe speed to drive? And the reality is, if this road didn't have intersections on it and people parked on the side of it, it would be very safe here to do probably 100 miles per hour in this car. It would be a predictable environment, but it's just not. Yeah, speed limits have exactly one purpose, and that is to take your money. Pretty recently, there was a year where the total income of all the local governments was $9 billion from fines, fees, and forfeitures. And there are a significant number of municipalities where over 50% of their revenue comes from fines. So that includes speeding tickets. Yeah, that cop is itching for a ticket. I'm just gonna do, I don't know, 30. I don't know what the speed limit is here. So, redesigning this road to actually be safe would be very expensive. You know, you pay a lot in taxes, so you deserve that. You deserve to have properly designed roads that aren't, you know, trying to kill you. What you don't deserve is to have some cop sitting on the side of the road, ready and itching to hand you a ticket for driving at a reasonable speed here. And speed enforcement is just so arbitrary in the United States. The way it's set up is basically we have a limit that's lower than what people actually drive at. People actually drive 5 to 25 miles per hour, or even more sometimes, over the speed limit on average, especially on highways. And the police are just able to arbitrarily enforce that. So if they don't like you, they can just decide, you know what, you're going to become revenue for the state now. I'm going to pull you over and you're going to pay us money. So it's just totally unethical system where instead of actually fixing roads and servicing the taxpayer, normal people are just treated as criminals. Yeah, look, another one. It's unreal. Like, there's so many cops down here, and it's not going to do anything. Like, you would think, well, there's so much speed enforcement here. Well, there's a 25 zone because of the construction, so this must be a safer road now. No, because it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is how safely the road itself is designed and how foresighted and intelligent the people driving on it are. So, anyways, that's just my 2 cents. And obviously I'm biased. You know, you've seen me throughout this video driving my sports car. I love to drive quickly, and I love to go to the racetrack. I've been, you know, go-karting since I was 5 years old. So yeah, maybe I'm biased. But at the same time, I have more experience and I care more about driving than the average person. So I'm going to go and do this research that other people probably aren't going to do. I mean, there's just so much propaganda out there that the government is telling you that speeding is the root of all evil. And if we could just stop everyone from speeding, the roads would become magically super safe. But really, if I'm sitting here doing this, I mean, I'm not even going to do that for longer than 2 seconds. That's so dangerous. If I'm sitting there staring at my speedometer, instead of just actually judging for myself what a reasonable speed is, obviously that's not very safe. And it just saddens me so much, because road safety is very important. I'm not somebody out here who's going to take a cavalier attitude to road safety and say that, you know, this rising death rate doesn't matter. It obviously does. It matters enough that we should be willing to do the difficult task of actually looking into the numbers and figuring out what is a real way of solving that issue. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. I think we need to do something about how things are now, because how things are now is just depressing. We shouldn't have a highway with the same speed limit as a school zone. I mean, that's just ridiculous.